Morgan Reynolds didn't look like she belonged in first class, at least according to the flight attendant who made that assessment aloud. In front of a line of passengers, loud enough for heads to turn, yet no one said a word. A professional black woman alone, holding a legitimate first-class ticket, was mocked, redirected to a seat near the lavatory, asked to verify her financial information, and treated as a fraud risk, all because of assumptions about her economic status and skin color. Before departure, she was humiliated, isolated, and judged. What no one realized was that by the time they landed, she would have the authority to freeze every asset connected to the airline. This isn't merely a tale of prejudice, it's a methodical dismantling of arrogance, systemic bias, and every individual who believed she wouldn't stand up for herself. The terminal at JFK buzzed with its usual measured chaos. Business travelers in pressed suits clutching coffee, announcements echoing overhead, and the occasional scuff of rolling luggage across polished floors. Morgan Reynolds walked with calm precision, her posture upright, her focus clear, her carry-on gliding smoothly beside her. The digital first-class ticket on her phone was confirmed and paid in full through a secure federal system. Her attire was professional and understated. A gray blazer, navy slacks, black flats. She was neither flashy nor out of place. Yet as she approached the first-class counter, she felt what she'd experienced countless times before. The gaze, the pause, the instant calculation in someone else's eyes. She stepped into line behind a man in a crisp blue blazer who barely registered her presence. When it was finally her turn, she approached with a polite smile. "Good morning. Morgan Reynolds. Confirmation number ending in 4T29, she said, presenting her ID. The attendant, whose name tag read Vanessa, scanned the document and paused, her brow furrowed, not in confusion, but disbelief. "First class?" Vanessa asked, louder than necessary, her question echoing through the waiting area. "Yes," Morgan replied calmly. Vanessa scanned again, then again. She stared at the screen, then at Morgan, then back at the screen. "Are you sure? Do you want to double-check your booking? These tickets start at over $3,000, depending on the day." Her voice wasn't hostile, but it carried a distinct sharpness, the kind that challenged people to prove they weren't lying. Morgan didn't flinch. "I'm quite sure that's the correct ticket. Purchased last Tuesday." Vanessa chuckled, more to herself than to Morgan, and turned to her colleague who had just approached. "Hey, Rebecca," she called over her shoulder. "You ever see someone try to use reward points for first class and forget they didn't qualify?" A woman standing nearby, blonde and tanned, turned at the comment and assessed Morgan from head to toe. "Let me guess," she said loudly, lips curling into a smirk. "She used airline miles or maybe one of those charity raffles." Several passengers chuckled. Morgan kept her gaze steady, jaw firm, eyes unflinching. She'd been here before. It never got easier, but she had developed the skill of not revealing anything. "I'll need a moment," Vanessa said, tapping at her screen. "There's a flag on the ticket. Nothing major. Probably just a glitch." "There shouldn't be." Morgan's voice remained measured. "I used a secured federal procurement card." Vanessa stopped typing. "Federal? As in government?" "Yes," Morgan said. "I'm on official travel." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Interesting." She tapped once more, then pressed a small button beneath the counter. A chime sounded, and a uniformed airport security officer appeared moments later. "Problem?" he asked, glancing between Vanessa and Morgan. "Possibly," Vanessa said sweetly. "Just a verification, standard stuff." The officer nodded, stepping beside Morgan. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to verify your identity again. Do you have any documentation besides your license?" Morgan handed over a federal ID card. He examined it, frowned. "Do you have anything with your financial information? Like a bank statement or the card used for booking?" Morgan narrowed her eyes. "Are you asking for my private banking information?" "It's just protocol," the officer said quickly. "We've had cases of stolen identities, and your name didn't show up in our elite passenger system. That's usually a red flag." "So now I'm a red flag?" Morgan asked, her voice still calm but developing an edge. The man shifted, clearly sensing a misstep, but unwilling to back down. "It's nothing personal, ma'am, just standard procedure." "Standard for whom?" she asked. "You didn't ask the gentleman in front of me for his financial history." Vanessa turned back to her terminal, muttering something under her breath. The officer glanced down at the ID again. "With respect, you don't fit the usual profile." "What profile is that?" Morgan asked, her voice dropping slightly, words deliberate. The officer stepped back. "I didn't mean—" "You just didn't expect me to notice," she cut in. Around her, the lobby had grown quieter. Some passengers pretended not to listen. Others watched openly. The blonde woman rolled her eyes, whispering to a man beside her. Morgan looked at the officer, then back to Vanessa. "If you need to verify something, I suggest you call the airline's liaison to the Department of the Treasury. My credentials are active. My clearance is level 7, and the last person who asked for my banking records is currently under federal audit." Vanessa blinked. The officer's eyebrows rose. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vanessa clicked her tongue and forced a smile. "No need for all that. I'll just print your boarding pass. Looks like everything's cleared." She pressed a button without making eye contact. The printer spat out a pass. Morgan took it without a word, slipped her ID back into her wallet, and turned to leave. The blonde woman watched her go, face blank. Morgan didn't look back. She didn't need to. The story was already writing itself. Morgan moved through the jet bridge with the same composed steps she'd taken since entering the terminal. But something shifted inside her the moment she stepped onto the aircraft. She was prepared for condescension. She had weathered it before, but not for how immediate and coordinated the shift would feel. As she offered her boarding pass to the smiling flight attendant at the aircraft door, the woman's eyes flicked down, scanned the seat number, then back up to Morgan's face with a polite doubt that wasn't overt, but intentional. "Ah, welcome," she said with a practiced smile. "You're in 2A. Let me just double-check something." She turned quickly, tapped her tablet, and frowned. "Looks like there's been a last-minute change due to an equipment issue in the front cabin. You've been reassigned to seat 9F. Morgan blinked. "Excuse me? It's just a temporary reallocation," the attendant said quickly. "You'll still receive first-class service, and we've placed you in a convenient location near the lavatory, which is often requested by—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Requested by whom?" Morgan's voice remained steady. The woman hesitated. "By passengers with certain needs. It's better for those who might need assistance or who are not frequent flyers." "I didn't request a seat change," Morgan said. "I paid for seat 2A specifically. Quiet window, priority zone." The attendant kept smiling, but her eyes said she had expected resistance. "We understand, but we've had to make some changes. We appreciate your cooperation." Morgan stared at her for a beat longer. "What exactly are you implying about my needs?" The woman looked uncomfortable now, her smile cracking slightly. "Nothing at all. We're simply accommodating all passengers as best we can." "Does the system also accommodate all the other first-class passengers by moving them to the back of the plane?" Morgan asked. The attendant said nothing, but her eyes flicked momentarily to a nearby passenger, a tall white man in a tailored charcoal suit, already settling comfortably into seat 2A. Morgan saw him glance up, saw him suppress the smirk at the corner of his mouth, saw how satisfied he looked occupying a space he had clearly not paid for, but had been handed. Morgan didn't push it further. Not yet. She turned and walked calmly toward her reassigned seat, the sounds of conversation and laughter in the premium section fading behind her as she passed into the transitional zone where luxury bled into utility. Row 9 was the last of the Comfort Plus seating, barely one step above economy, and seat 9F was pressed directly against the rear lavatory, where the smell of sanitizer mingled with recycled air and engine vibration. As she sat down, she felt the armrest stick slightly beneath her palm and noticed the window was smudged with someone else's fingerprints. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Her boarding pass still read first class. She had the proof, but no one cared. To them, she wasn't supposed to belong in that space, so they had adjusted reality until it suited their expectations. A few moments later, as passengers continued to board, a man across the aisle, a heavy-set, middle-aged white man with slicked-back gray hair and a watch that caught the overhead light, leaned over slightly and said, "Rough morning." Morgan turned toward him, expression unreadable. "Not particularly." He gave a casual chuckle. "I mean, seems like they shuffled you around. That happens sometimes, especially with clerical errors. The system can't always tell the difference between tiers or payment methods." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The man shrugged, still smiling. "Just saying, I've seen it before. Someone wins a promo, gets bumped up for a mileage reward or charity donation, and suddenly thinks they've made it. System adjusts, happens more than you'd think." Morgan stared at him. "And what makes you think that's what happened here?" He raised both hands. "No offense. You seem sharp, professional, just not the usual first-class type." "And what is that type exactly?" she asked. "Well, typically not government suits." He chuckled again, then leaned back in his seat. Morgan said nothing. She didn't need to. A flight attendant passed through the aisle a few minutes later, glanced toward her row, then whispered something to the colleague beside her. The other nodded and, in a voice just loud enough to carry, muttered, "She's probably one of those non-profit shells. I can smell it. They're all the same. Pretend they're fixing the world while hiding donor money." Morgan heard it clearly, every word. Her body remained still, but her mind recorded it like a file being etched onto glass. From the first smirk at the counter to the shuffling into the back, from the businessman's smug dismissal to the crew's whispered assumptions. This wasn't bad service. It was exclusion executed through policy, justified by protocol, wrapped in smiles, and made possible by the comfort of those who believed their privilege protected them from consequences. But Morgan had learned long ago that privilege was just a currency, and currencies could collapse. She reached slowly for her phone, tapped a secure note, and typed 4 lines. "Flight 782. Reassigned from 2A without justification. Witnessed verbal profiling. Confirmed internal collusion." She hit save, locked the screen, and looked out the window as the final passengers boarded. Her seat rattled slightly as someone behind her pushed a bag underfoot. The scent of hand soap and engine oil drifted in from the rear. She exhaled once, slow and steady, then tilted her head slightly back. She wasn't just on a flight anymore. She was in the middle of a live investigation, one they didn't know they had triggered yet. The cabin lights dimmed as the final announcement echoed through the speakers, signaling that boarding was complete, and the aircraft was preparing for departure. Morgan sat motionless in her reassigned seat 9F, eyes focused on the smudged window, the faint reflection of her own calm, unreadable expression staring back. The smell of antiseptic from the nearby lavatory lingered in the air, a subtle reminder of how far removed she was from the space she had paid for and been denied. The engines began their steady rumble beneath her feet. But before the plane could push back from the gate, a sharp chime cut through the cabin noise. Moments later, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ms. Morgan Reynolds, please report to the front galley immediately. Ms. Morgan Reynolds, the captain would like a word with you." The murmurs began instantly. Heads turned, eyes widened. Some mouths whispered things they didn't think she would hear. Morgan slowly rose, her posture composed, gathering her coat and phone with deliberate care. She didn't ask why. She already knew. As she walked up the aisle, the glances shifted from curious to suspicious. The man who had mocked her earlier in row 3 raised an eyebrow and muttered, Well, what now?" Morgan didn't look at him. She kept walking until she reached the front of the plane where the curtain separated the crew's galley from the passenger cabin. There, standing stiffly with arms crossed, was the captain, a tall man in his early 50s with neatly trimmed silver hair and a rigid jawline. His expression was as formal as his uniform, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed something more than standard procedure. "Miss Reynolds," he said, not unkindly but not warmly either. "May I ask you to step inside for a quick clarification regarding your travel credentials?" Morgan tilted her head slightly. Is there a problem, Captain? We've received a passenger report and an internal flag from our crew regarding a potential mismatch between your booking and your ID, he explained, carefully choosing each word. It's probably nothing, just something we need to verify before we proceed further. A mismatch, Morgan repeated. As in, someone doubts that I'm who I say I am. It's not an accusation, he replied. We just have to make sure all passengers on board are properly accounted for. You understand? What I understand, Morgan said evenly, is that I've been removed from a seat I paid for, placed next to a restroom, and now I'm being asked to defend my identity to strangers on a domestic flight. The captain didn't reply, but the lead flight attendant standing beside him, Diana, the same one who'd handed her the seat reassignment, interjected with a slight smirk. It's just a formality, Miss Reynolds. In these times, people do all sorts of things to access premium seating. We had someone last month use a fake non-profit account to slip into first. Turned out he'd been on a no-fly list. Morgan looked her straight in the eyes. So I fit the profile. Diana raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Let's not pretend this isn't profiling, Morgan said. I've already shown my ID twice. You know who I am. This isn't about verification. It's about intimidation. The captain stepped forward slightly, a palm raised. Let's keep this civil. We're not accusing you of anything, but if you have any official documentation, something more than a standard ID that could expedite this process. Morgan's response was immediate. I'm not obligated to provide anything beyond what I've already given you, and you're not authorized to demand it without probable cause. Diana scoffed. Ma'am, we're trying to keep things professional, but if you have nothing to hide, why not just cooperate? Morgan smiled faintly, cold and unshaken. Because being treated like a suspect on the basis of someone else's bias isn't something I'm required to tolerate. Not here, not anywhere. Diana's voice dropped an octave, her frustration slipping past the facade. You really want to make a scene, don't you? Look, I get it. You bought the ticket. You want the experience. But honestly, if getting a taste of first class means going through all this trouble, maybe it's not worth it. I mean, let's be real. Is it really worth the risk? Morgan narrowed her eyes. What risk are you referring to? Diana shrugged. I don't know. Getting caught. Jail time. People go to prison over federal fraud every year. You wouldn't be the first. Morgan's silence was louder than any retort. The captain, now clearly uncomfortable, shifted his stance. Diana, he said under his breath. But Morgan heard it. It didn't matter. The implication had already been made. They weren't verifying her identity. They were accusing her of identity theft, financial fraud, and perhaps even impersonating a government official. All without evidence, all because she didn't look the part. We'll be making a formal report to our internal compliance team, the captain continued, trying to salvage authority. You'll be allowed to remain on board, but security may meet us upon arrival for standard review. Good, Morgan replied. I look forward to speaking with them. She turned on her heel, walking back down the aisle with the same steady gait she had when she entered. Every step felt heavier, with the realization that the flight wasn't just a journey. It had become a stage, and every player had chosen their role. The whispers resumed as she passed, none louder than the one from the businessman in 3A, who leaned across the aisle to whisper just loud enough, She's lucky she's not already in handcuffs. His companion responded with a quiet laugh. But what kind of scammer buys first class and sits next to the toilet? Amateurs. Morgan reached her seat, slid in, and pulled the shade halfway down. Her face remained neutral, but her mind had shifted. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was a line being drawn, and they had just crossed it. Morgan remained silent as she returned to her seat, the path back from the front galley now crowded with whispered assumptions and sideways glances. She sat down in 9F without a word, adjusting the lapel of her blazer and gently placing her phone face down on the tray table. The faint whir of the overhead fans mixed with the soft hum of the engines, but her thoughts moved faster than either. The tone of the flight had changed. What began as exclusion was now tilting toward intrusion, and she could feel it happening before the next moment proved her right. 10 minutes passed before a flight attendant passed by with a beverage cart, her posture brisk, her tone efficient. As she paused near the row ahead of Morgan, handing out glasses and sparkling waters with effortless cheer, Morgan raised her hand and asked calmly, "Could I have a bottle of water, please?" The attendant glanced at her without smiling, nodded once, and reached for the smallest bottle on her cart. Little did she know that this simple interaction would be documented in a report that would reach the highest levels of corporate governance within 24 hours. A report that would trigger the most thorough